Hey, folks, when you give somebody a gift, you want them to enjoy it immediately. You don't want it to be some massive hassle for them or for you, for that matter. Of course, I'm talking about when you give a relative or a friend, maybe a parent or a grandparent, a gift that involves any type of technology. Sometimes it ends up being more of a chore than a gift. Well, this is why you give Aura digital frames. It is honestly one of my favorite gifts to give to, well, in my case, my siblings, my parents. Why? Because Aura digital frames are so easy to set up. I mean, they look beautiful, they function really well, but they are so easy to set up. You get the Aura app for free. You can preload your photographs onto the frame to the person that you're giving them to. You can also set up the frame for their Wi-Fi. So they've got to just tell you what their Wi-Fi is and then look up in the notebook that they keep in the drawer in the kitchen with all their passwords and tell you what the password is to the Wi-Fi. It is super simple. Wirecutter calls it the best digital picture frame out there. It's a great gift, even for the most tech unsavvy people in your life. Give the perfect gift this holiday. Visit auraframes.com/majority today and get $30 off their best-selling frames. You don't have to have the box, incidentally, in hand. You can send it to them and get the code and just do it through their app. These frames sell out quickly. Get yours before they're gone. That's AURA frames, auraframes.com/majority. Use the promo code majority. Get $30 off their best-selling frame. Terms and conditions apply. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube and website descriptions. Now for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, on Clarence Thomas's delicate matter, which involved money.
Shocker.
Yes. Then Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, on private equity's drowning, or devouring, I should say, of the economy. Meanwhile, Trump disqualified from the Colorado 2024 ballot, according to the Colorado Supreme Court. The decision will be stayed, though, until it is reviewed till January 4th by the U.S. Supreme Court. The UN still can't find a ceasefire resolution that the U.S. won't veto. Congress abandons Ukraine aid as talks continue to abandon asylum seekers and immigrants headed to this country. Southwest Airlines and pilot union reach a preliminary deal after years of negotiation. U.S. housing aid hits lowest level in 25 years as homelessness surges. Biden administration will ban most old-growth logging in the U.S. Tennessee introduces a bill to ban pride flags in schools.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Free speech.
EU agrees to a migration pact to make rejected asylum seekers easier to deport and to limit immigrants as a whole. New 2023 crime statistics show a precipitous drop in crime. Imagine that.
Okay, but have you seen the local news? Because I see a lot of footage.
Also, we got an update on that Target closing their stores because of crime, and you can imagine what that update is. Lastly, new report, Xi Jinping told Biden China will reunite with Taiwan. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Hump Day, and I have to admonish you for publicly saying Biden's code name, his communist code name, Chiden.
Did I say Chiden?
You did say Chiden. And that was, we were under explicit instructions.
Not to say Chiden?
Not to say Chiden, because we're the white hot spotlight right now is on Biden's communist ties to China and the payments coming through Hunter. And so...
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yes, that's true.
I'm just really
that's his code
disappointed
name.
in you.
Yes, I blew it. Just sort of making it right over the, just barely making to the finish line for Hump Day. Of course, we're also, I should say, we are gearing up, ladies and gentlemen, for our end of the year vacation. We're all going on vacation for 6 days. We will be back January 2nd. And we're headed off at the beginning of next week. We got some great best ofs for you. You will enjoy it. And, some like little, not just, the typical interviews, but also we've got some of the comedy interviews as well. Know that you will enjoy that. So do. We'll walk you through this Colorado ruling. It is... maybe we should. Well, we'll do that at the end of the show.
Okay.
Let's start with this clip. Let me put it this way: highly unlikely that Donald Trump won't be on the ballot for the general election. Very, very likely, almost guaranteed, he will actually be on the primary ballot in Colorado because of this stay. Because the Supreme Court doesn't have to touch it until January 4th. Then they can take however long they want to look at it, and it will inevitably be stayed during that time. You need a certain amount of advance time to have the ballot printed. Colorado primary is in March, and so I would imagine almost assuredly he will be on the ballot in the primary. But nevertheless, we will go over this question of the 14th Amendment. And then, of course, it's almost impossible to imagine that particularly this Supreme Court wouldn't allow him on the ballot. But with that said, let's talk about what he's doing while he considers himself to be a candidate for the president of the United States, which he still is. We told you the other day that over the past weekend, I guess it was Saturday, and I can't remember if he was in, I think he was in New Hampshire.
Durham. Yeah.
He talked about immigrants coming to this country and destroying the blood of our country. And he said, we've got immigrants. It's not just the countries you're thinking of down in Central America. It's also from Africa and Asia.
Right.
Destroying the blood of our country. And we watched Nancy Stokatipolopoulos. What is it?
You're confusing all of these right-wing hacks. It's Nicole, not Nancy Mace, but Nicole Malio-Stocktips, a.k.a. Malio-Takis,
okay,
who represents parts of Staten Island, and George Santos has called her Malio-Stocktips too much amusement by me.
She got some inside information while she's in Congress to make a lot of money with her stocks. And we watched a clip of her yesterday trying to justify this by saying, well, he was actually talking about policies.
Mm-hmm. Policies were
all the
coming
policies
in.
that are coming across the border from Africa and Asia, as you know. Nevertheless, here's Donald Trump repeating his line, putting, Miss Stokatipolopoulos, wherever, Stock Tippets.
Yeah.
Stock Tippets. Making her have to, I imagine she's not going to go on TV for a couple of days.
Yeah, being like, did I stutter? Did I stutter, Malio Stocktips? This is what I meant, the Nazi thing.
Here is Trump saying, Well, I did say that, but to my credit, it's my line. I didn't plagiarize.
They come from Africa. They come from Asia. They come from South America, but not just South America. They're all over the world. They dump them on the border and they pour into our country, and nobody's there to check them. And the Border Patrol's incredible, by the way. They want to do it, but they're told not to do their job. It's crazy what's going on. They're ruining our country. And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way. No, they're coming from all over the world.
Okay. Now, just to be clear, I mean, I don't know what Hitler said it in a much different way, I guess, is like he said it in German. But and we said this the other day when we were talking about this. We don't know what's worse. The idea that he was just copying Hitler because he knows this is a extra dog whistle. I mean, what he's saying in and of itself is obviously incredibly offensive and
scary
and racist.
Yeah.
I mean, and white supremacist. I mean, all of it. To purposely lift it from Hitler is a way of signaling to his neo-Nazi fans, hey, you know, look at what I've been reading.
Right.
To just generate it on your own and have this moment of like, great minds think alike. What can I tell you? I did not take it from him. I've never even read Mein Kampf. I would imagine anyways, he probably heard it on a book on tape type of situation. But the point being that it is still so racist that you've got Republican congresspeople on TV pretending he didn't say it. And then just unfortunately for them, he comes out the next day and says, oh, I did say it, but I just want to make sure I'm getting credit.
Yeah.
I didn't plagiarize it.
Trump doesn't read, like, you know, there were reports that he barely read the documents that were provided for him as president, and, you know, they had to be kept short. That was also Bush's problem, right? He wanted shorter memos.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It seems like a pattern here. But like, so I don't doubt that he didn't read Mein Kampf, because I don't really think Donald Trump reads very much. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have an understanding of who he's gesturing towards. And either way, we saw this when, you know, Steve Bannon, and I would not be shocked if Bannon is a part of this.
Or Stephen Miller.
Or Miller, right? Who's an actual
Let me just
white
say,
supremacist.
I did not read Mein Kampf. Now, Stephen Miller, well, of course he did. In fact, he gave me a book report and just said, give me a list of the best lines from Mein Kampf.
Yeah, Steve's Cliff's Notes are
I never read it.
Are just so good. You know, like all of this stuff screams like Stephen Miller to me. And he was on cable news fairly recently. I'm wondering if he's seeing this as an opportunity to weasel himself back in.
Oh, I'm not sure he was ever out.
Well, sure, but maybe in a more formal role. I have very little doubt in my mind that he's behind the blood comments. And so this is just more of the same. And what Trump is going to learn from his time in office is that I'm not messing around this time. I'm not going to listen to people talking about restraint, how I shouldn't use the Insurrection Act.
No more like Rex Tillerson.
No more Reince Priebus's in my administration. Yeah. No more guardrails. That's what I'm going to do if I'm president. And the guys like Stephen Miller will really be running the show that time.
We will get to more, and we will talk about that Colorado ruling later in the program. In a moment, I'm going to be talking to Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, following up on the story that we heard from another ProPublica reporter, Andy Kroll, about Leonard Leo. And this fills in some of the gaps in terms of Clarence Thomas. Fascinating. And then we'll speak to Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, about the burgeoning private equity sort of like devouring of our economy. We'll talk to both of them in just a moment. First, a couple of words from our sponsors. This time of year, folks are obviously giving to charity. Hopefully you do it throughout the year, but nevertheless, this is a big year, a big time of the year when people are giving charitable gifts. And folks often wonder, how much of an impact does their donation give? Well, in 2007, a group of donors had that exact question They sought out information from charities to help them answer this question, and all they ended up doing was getting, pictures or stories. They wanted data. So they created GiveWell. It's an organization providing rigorous, transparent research about the best giving opportunities they've found. GiveWell has now spent over 15 years researching charitable organizations, only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they found in global health and poverty alleviation. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of a million more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. And it's not just free for you. You make these tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell does not take a cut of that either. This is a completely free, donor-supported site, both for you as a donor and for the charities that receive your donations. This is a great site. They have all sorts of opportunities for you to give. In this instance, there are 4 main charities that they have highlighted this year. One, for example, is bed nets for malaria, and they show you how many lives you will save through these charities. For me, the one that I give to through GiveWell is direct payments for childhood vaccinations. They send $160 to families to encourage them to get their infants vaccinated. And then the families also have the opportunity to spend that money in a way that is really effective for them. There's a study out, actually, just I saw today in San Francisco about paying homeless people money directly. And it's a much more effective way of doing it. And so this is a twofer. That's the one that I choose, but you should go, you read the research, you see which one you like. And the great thing about GiveWell is they do all you can see all of the research they've done for the past 15 years and the different charities they have supported over the course of that time. And they even have like a vertical where they talk about the mistakes they've made. Maybe they forgot to put up this research or that research. It really is an incredibly transparent site. If you have never donated through GiveWell before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org, pick podcast, enter Majority Report with Sam Seder at the checkout. That way they know that you heard about GiveWell from the Majority Report, and then you will get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. So another sponsor today. I took my 4 pills of pills. Is that what they call them?
Yeah, supplements, but they're pills.
Yeah, but they're not in pill form. They're in capsule form. Took my 4 capsules this morning of Nutrafol. What is Nutrafol? Nutrafol provides a whole body health approach for men that promotes healthier hair. No drugs, no compromises, just better hair. You do not have to choose between your health and your hair. They came to us years ago to sponsor the show. At the time, I was like, I don't need this. I asked folks around the office. Nobody said yes.
No one specific.
But then they came back to us, I don't know, maybe it was about a year ago. And Emma had a story of a friend who really had success with Nutrafol. I had a story of a friend who had success with Nutrafol, and I was like, I'm going to try it. I'm starting to go a little thinning on this side, and so I figured, why not? Nutrafol's hair growth supplements, they are physician formulated. They use 100% drug-free ingredients. Their patented technology provides consistent, reliable results without compromising your sex life. Now, some supplements rely solely on ingredient studies. Nutrafol clinically tests the final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 84% of men showed improvement in their hair after 6 months taking Nutrafol's Men Hair Growth Supplement. You can take their hair wellness quiz at Nutrafol.com/men, and they'll give you a personalized hair health plan based upon your specific root causes. No pun intended. With Nutrafol, building hair growth routine is simple. You purchase online, no prescription or doctor's visits are required. Free shipping, automated deliveries, ensure you'll never miss a day. You will see results, if like 84% of you anyways, in 3 to 6 months. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand. Over 1 million people seeing thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For limited time, Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. It's TMR for the Majority Report, TMR. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code TMR. Link, of course, in the podcast and YouTube description. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, on a very delicate matter involving Clarence Thomas. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Joshua Kaplan. He is a reporter at ProPublica. Welcome to the program, Josh.
Thanks for having me on.
Josh, we spoke to Andy Kroll, I guess it was maybe a week or two ago, I can't remember, who had written this, or one of the writers on this piece that ProPublica did on Leonard Leo. And in that piece, there was a couple of lines in reference to Leonard Leo getting the sense that some of the Supreme Court justices, particularly Clarence Thomas and Scalia maybe, felt oppressed by the criticism they were getting and the lack of money that they were making. Supreme Court justices make $300,000 a year, but of course you've got to, you've got all sorts of expenses, I guess, associated with that. You've got to buy that yellow note paper, the legal pads, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you guys followed up with this story. It is amazing because it really provides insight to this dynamic. And let me just say also at the top of this, before you get into telling us what it was, I read that part of the way that the court packing thing didn't happen under FDR was the idea of increasing the pensions of Supreme Court justices at that time because they did not have very good pensions. And there was no encouragement for them to leave because they needed the money to stay in the job.
Yeah.
And by increasing pensions, it basically said, now's the time to enjoy your golden years. And this is sort of the inverse of that. It's fascinating. Tell us where this story starts.
Yeah, so we got our hands on some documents and other new materials that gave us this rare window into Justice Thomas's financial situation during a really crucial period in his tenure. About 10 years after he joined the court, when his relationships with these set of billionaire benefactors were really starting to blossom. And Thomas had become frustrated with his finances in that period, we learned. And we found that on multiple occasions, Thomas was privately pushing for more ways to make money, higher salaries, letting judges start giving paid speeches on the side. Those efforts, they weren't successful, but there is a certain frankness to some of this that has never really become public before. So, for instance, in one instance, Thomas was on the flight home from a conservative conference, and he happened to be seated next to a Republican congressman. And he gave him a warning that left the congressman afraid Thomas was going to resign soon. Thomas told him that Congress needed to give Supreme Court justices a raise, or else one or more justices would soon step down, maybe even within the next year.
And what year was that?
That's 2000.
2000. And so it was unclear who was going to be the president, right? Or is that, we're in the middle of a campaign. Yep. And the presumption was, it wasn't a slam dunk, but the presumption was the incumbent vice president has a very good chance of staying the president.
Yeah. And there was, we talked to, a lot of members of Congress, really prominent conservative attorneys. And there was a real fear in Capitol Hill at this time that Thomas might leave. The Senate Majority Leader at the time told us that this was a real concern that was on the table, and also this kind of chatter that friends told us was more than chatter, that Thomas was dissatisfied with his financial situation, was also circulating in conservative legal circles back then. It's fascinating because on one hand, I think it's arguable that we should be paying, frankly, every public servant more money. I think there's a pretty good argument for that, frankly, certainly because you want them to compete with the private sector so that we can, slow the revolving door and whatnot. But it's hard to sort of parse what was involved in this campaign. Because you're communicating two things, right? You're saying we're going to leave if Congress doesn't. To say that to a congressperson is a different argument than, hey, there's a lot of opportunity for Supreme Court justices to make a lot of money outside of being a Supreme Court justice. And it's good public policy to pay us more, versus this sort of veiled threat that we're going to leave if we don't get paid more, because it's not like you're talking to your direct boss, right? It's right. A weird dynamic, and it's hard to parse. Or do you have a sense from your reporting how naked was the idea of broadcasting this to somebody's going to come and rescue me here, and you guys figure out who it's going to be? I can't say definitively how far, what this crucially is, I think, is context for what was to come, which, as we've been reporting all year, in the 2000s and the 2010s, Thomas accepted a stream of expensive gifts from wealthy businessmen that appears to be unprecedented in the modern history of the Supreme Court, and mostly happened in secret. We're talking likely millions of dollars in value here, from private school tuition to luxury vacations around the world and private jet flights to pretty ordinary living expenses like tires. And some of these gifts were coming from people he had met very, very soon after they'd first met Justice Thomas. And what we discovered a lot about the gifts, there's still a lot we don't know about how and why this all happened. And precisely what led so many people to offer Thomas money and other gifts over the years. And so I think understanding how Thomas was viewing his financial situation and how he was talking about his financial situation in those early years is really important context.
Who was the point person for conservative justices in this country at that time, and now? So in other words, if I'm a congressperson, a conservative congressperson, right? Because he's not calling up, let's say, Barney Frank at the time and saying, hey man, he's talking to conservative lawmakers, and he's complaining to them and making sure that everybody knows I could leave because I need more cash. Who would these Congress people go to if they couldn't get legislation? And do we have any evidence that they even attempted legislation at that point? I guess is one question. Who would they go to? It would have been Leonard Leo, yes?
I mean, he was, the Federalist Society is certainly the kind of preeminent conservative legal organization at that stage. And it was pretty in its early days still, in terms of, it wasn't the kind of, it was very influential, but it wasn't anything close to the monolith it is today. And we don't know that, the congressman in that story I was telling earlier, that he ever spoke to Leo, for instance. But in terms of, who was really engaged on this, one of the things that's so striking about that is this congressman, he was a vocal conservative. He'd been on the Hill for a while. He had a bit of a relationship with Thomas, but he had no engagement on these issues prior to this. He was not on the kind of relevant committees. He's not the sort of go-to person, which suggests that Thomas was talking about this with fairly freely, maybe. And this just happened to be the one that was very well documented, and we were able to get our hands on those documents. And also, I mean, there's several. For instance, this congressman, he gave a speech on the House floor about inflation eroding district court judges' salaries after this, and he was exploring legislation. But you would never, at the time, hearing that speech, have any kind of hint of what was sparking that.
He talked about district judges, but not Supreme Court judges.
He mentioned Supreme Court judges, but it was, he was talking really about, how hard this was for district court judges. Yeah.
I mean, with Thomas talking about it freely, is this also potentially just an effort to be the right people and you can talk to the right people?
I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah,
there's still huge open questions, hanging over all of this.
Yeah.
At one point, you report several people close to Thomas told ProPublica they believed that it was implausible the justice would ever retire early, and that he may have exaggerated his concerns to bolster the case for a raise. What do you make of that? I mean, they've made this argument that he was just looking for to bolster a case for a raise. But this is, again, it's not like this is an internal issue, right? This is a public policy question. Maybe it would have been untoward for the justices to come out publicly to do that, but it's not inconceivable that if you really wanted to make it like a raise situation, that was the most important thing. It's not inconceivable. You get a 25% raise, which would be, basically the equivalent of $400,000 total at that point. But you would say, it seems to me, if it was you're advocating for a raise, you would be able to pick up the phone and call the judiciary, somebody you knew on the judiciary. You don't even have to know them. You're a Supreme Court justice, and say, you should have hearings and maybe have a statement from the Supreme Court. Had it been about a raise, there would have been a more sort of public policy style debate about this, it seems to me, right? Or no?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, to be clear, what these people were saying was essentially that they didn't think Thomas meant it when he said he might step down, and he might not have. I mean, he apparently likes to tell people he, wants to die on the court, and so maybe he was calculating. They were saying that by raising this threat, this the specter of losing this conservative icon, it would get a little more juice into his push to get more money, which it did. It scared.
Well, that's my
people.
point. Is it
right?
There's a raise for your job, and then there's all of a sudden I have a lot of really wealthy friends who are offering to buy my mom a house, to pay for my essentially adopted child's private school, to send me on trips, to put me on private jets. I mean, presumably we know about this stuff now. A lot of it we didn't know until you guys did this reporting. Theoretically, there could be other stuff out there we don't know about. But there's a difference between a raise from my job and all of a sudden I have just a bunch of benefactors. Yeah. And lucky, what a stroke of luck. And I should also add, when did Ginny Thomas start getting these jobs that she has, working for the Heritage Foundation or Hillsdale and all of these conservative organizations that have paid her a very significant salary over the years?
Yeah, that was right around this time. She was a Hill staffer for most of the 90s, but in the late 90s, she left to start working for Heritage and then bounced around to Hillsdale, eventually started her own consulting company, which...
Has that been successful?
It's a complete black box. It's one of the great ways that the federal disclosure laws are set up is that since she made it an LLC, we know nothing about it. We don't know how much money went in. We don't know who she's worked for. The Post had a great story, if people haven't read it, earlier this year, about how Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society kind of had this directed, I think it was another $25,000 to Ginny. And he arranged it in this way so that there'd be no fingerprints to him or to his organizations on that payment. And in the memo or email where he was directing this money to go to her, he said, no mention of Ginny, of course.
Well, this is also around the time I just was reminded that and you talked about the disclosures of some of this in the piece, that basically, I think around 2004, the LA Times reported on some of the things that Thomas had disclosed about the gifts that he'd received from wealthy benefactors. And the lesson he took from that LA Times story in around 2004, if my recollection serves me, was... I'm just going to still keep taking the gifts, but I'm just going to stop disclosing it.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't know it's actually right around this period. It's a little earlier than that LA Times piece that we start seeing undisclosed gifts. It's around the year 2000 that there's the first luxury vacation that we know about that didn't make it into his disclosure forms. And in the 90s, when he was doing when he was going on trips like this, as far as we know, he was telling the public. But right around this period where this conversation happened, he goes to Russia on Harlan Crow's private jet and goes on this cruise on his yacht through the Baltics. And other stuff like that is starting to happen too. And how he made that decision to stop disclosing these things is completely unclear.
There's a lot of really odd coincidences about the sequencing of this stuff, Josh. He broadcasts to everybody in the conservative movement that he can that he's has an income deficiency, and then suddenly, luckily for him, his wife gets a job at a conservative think tank, which leads to other things, and he starts meeting all these people I guess it takes a couple of years before you settle in at work until you start meeting like some of your new friends, I guess, and get paid. I mean, is there any, do you know how much of this may come up in the context of, I mean, I know the last I heard from the Senate Judiciary was that they were going to subpoena Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo. I don't know if they're going to decide to show up, frankly. But I wonder how much of this reporting, if you have any of awareness, is being looked at by at least the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, because this timeline is, like I say, either just shockingly coincidental or very, very damning. And it really does just seem to be like, basically, let's make sure this guy doesn't quit and he's happy, he's complaining, needs more money, and we're just going to deliver it through outside sources.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the next steps are for the Senate investigation. I mean, they have been trying for months now to get a more comprehensive accounting of these gifts, and rather than what me and a couple colleagues were able to find. And so far, Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo have both stonewalled them. The subpoenas really change, I think, that calculus. Certainly, at least until relatively recently, most people were very afraid to play around with a Senate subpoena. Although, with the current kind of partisan political environment, they might, as you said, they might be able to just blow it off, essentially. And I mean, I think important thing to underscore here is that this is, I think the root issue in all of this is that the Supreme Court, has less oversight, less accountability, less rules about ethics than really just about any other part of the federal government. And, most places there would be processes for finding this out, and it also simply would not be allowed.
Well, just before we let you go, what do you feel like is the next piece of this puzzle that we might hear about?
We're still actively reporting on all fronts. I mean, and online justices too, because Thomas has, as far as we know, doing this at a scale that is, kind of well beyond what any of the other justices are, but we don't know what we don't know. And in terms of how this all unfolded, and how we got to, where we are right now, we still have more questions than answers, and are very much trying to answer them.
Josh Kaplan, reporter of ProPublica, great piece. We will link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, on the secretive industry devouring the U.S. economy. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome to the program Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, on his recent piece. I guess it's been a month or so now. The Secretive Industry Devouring the U.S. Economy. Roge, welcome to the program. I have to say that, like, over the past couple of years, I have become increasingly aware that, like, dermatologist, dentist, like, the houses around me, like everywhere I go, everything seems to have been bought by some type of private equity company that is running stuff that they have no idea. And you really lay it out. Talk to us about what has happened in terms of just like where we can see how much of the economy private equity has taken over.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sam. And I'm really happy to be here. And I think you're right. The sort of premise of the piece was not just this is happening in a few handful of places. It's that, like, the stock market itself is disappearing. So in 1996, there were about 8,000 firms listed on the US stock market. Since then, the national economy has grown by $20 million. The population is up 70 million people. And yet today, the number of public companies in the US has been virtually cut in half to about fewer than 4,000. And so the question is, like, how can that be? What is going on? And one answer is that private equity is devouring more and more of the economy. So a private equity firm, for your listeners are probably well aware.
That was my next question.
It's basically a fund that takes, some investor money, a bunch of borrowed money, and then uses it to buy a majority stake in a company with the goal of reselling it at a profit a few years later. And in doing so, the fund takes that company private. So if the company was publicly traded, it's no longer publicly traded. If the company was private, well, now it has no reason to go public. And the difference is really crucial, right? Because public companies have to disclose all kinds of information, from who owns them to how they make their money to their legal liabilities. Private companies don't have to basically reveal any of that. And as you were saying, that didn't matter when private equity was this niche industry, but that really isn't the case anymore. So in 2000, private equity firms managed about 4% of corporate equity, worth around $770 billion. Today, they manage nearly a fifth, worth over $12 trillion.
Wow.
And so you've probably heard of a lot of these companies, right? That private equity has taken from public to private. Hilton, PetSmart, Toys R Us, Petco, the list goes on. And the sort of point of the piece is that, like, this is worrying even if you've never bought a stock in your life, because it means a fifth of our economy is functionally operating in the shadows, effectively invisible to investors, to regulators, and ultimately the public. And that we know from history that that's a recipe for disaster.
All right. I want to get to the disclosure aspects of it and the transparency aspects in a minute, but so what kind of firms are we talking about? Like, is Bain Capital, is that a private equity firm? And if so, can you walk us through? Because I remember what happened with Toys R Us. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that this is, a lot of, maybe not a lot of wealthy people, maybe just a few wealthy people, maybe a few core wealthy people, and then, some other wealthy people put in a little bit. And then what they do is they borrow a lot of money, but they put it on the ledger of the company they're borrowing, right? And exactly. So walk us through this, because this is, it seems like a cool party trick, but the implications of it in terms of workers, in terms of the community, arguably in terms of consumers, but really in terms of like workers in the community, it is really stunning. So we walk us through how that process works.
Yeah. So basically, these are firms. You mentioned Bain, which is a little bit different, but these are firms like, you've probably heard of KKR, Apollo, Carlyle Group, Blackstone. And what basically happens is they get their money from what are called institutional investors. So these are pension funds, these are university endowments, these are sovereign wealth funds. And essentially, there is for a long time, the sort of deal was in American capitalism that if you wanted to raise a lot of money from the public, you had to, disclose a lot of information about yourselves for a lot of reasons that there's a loophole created. So these companies raise a huge amount of money. And what they basically do is they then go to, a bank, a non-bank lender, increasingly a private credit, which is a whole new industry. They say, look, we have this money. We want to buy this company, a majority stake in this company. And look, we have this track record of being able to turn around companies. So they raise a lot of money from banks. They put all of that debt, as you said, on the ledger of the company that they just bought. And their sort of business pitch is, we make these companies more efficient. We make them better. In a matter of years, this company is going to be more profitable, and we're going to be able to resell it to another private equity firm, or maybe we'll take it public again at a higher price. I think what you're getting at is, in reality, this ends up often being a disaster. A lot of these, what you see basically time and time again, and there are study after study showing this across industries, that these private equity firms, one, systematically bankrupt companies, taking advantage of loopholes in bankruptcy law in order to basically slough off pension obligations onto the taxpayers. So that's one thing that they do. But time and time again, what you see is they jack up prices, reduce the quality of services. And in an industry like nursing homes, for example, which private equity has bought a lot of in the last few decades, those consequences, they can have life or death stakes, right? So the private equity investment in nursing homes went from $5 billion in 2000 to around $100 billion today. And what you basically see over that time is stories of patients being overprescribed drugs and being rushed to the hospital, bedside call buttons be so poorly attended that patients soil themselves waiting. And that's because these private equity funds are trying to squeeze so much profit any way that they can. And in doing so, are really cutting back on the quality of services, even as they raise prices. There was one study in 2021 that found that between 2005 and 2017, so a 12-year period, private equity ownership of nursing homes was responsible for 22,000 excess deaths. So nursing homes, right, aren't angels. Public companies aren't angels. But even relative to the normal average nursing home, there was 22,000 excess deaths, and this was before COVID. And so the whole sort of point that I'm trying to get at with this piece is that, if companies are going to be able to do this, and part of the reason that they're able to do this is because we don't know anything about them. They know that they can get away with this because it takes, the only reason we even know about any of these horrors in the nursing home industry is because of painstaking work by journalists, by researchers. And if we had had more public disclosure, regulators, could have been acting a decade earlier, and instead of all the experimentation and harm that we've been seeing.
Well, I mean,
I just want to hit this point because the nursing homes are the most explicit of examples of this. And we also, for every person excess death, we don't know how many people are being overprescribed. I mean, they come in, they cut the staffing, they have minimal staff, they have X number of patients per staff member. It's hard for them to control. You want to make sure that maybe people aren't getting up and walking out, or that someone's not sitting in a corner, and they rely on the drugs. It's easier to do that. And the analogy in other businesses would be, we're going to slash pensions, we're going to slash payrolls, we're going to do all this stuff. We're going to invest less in R&D. We're going to invest less in inputs in terms of quality of stuff. And we have no way of knowing, because they're just basically, this is completely extractive, and society is not aware of how much being extracted because of the lack of transparency. Exactly. So we don't know that we need government regulation. We don't know, because they don't have to pay that many shareholders. There isn't sort of widespread problems like, hey, this company's going down the tubes. It doesn't matter because the half dozen of us who have put in the most money, we're making cash. We don't care. It's just all extractive.
Exactly. And to give you one other example. So nursing homes, again, are the most explicit example. Some of the reporting I did for this piece was around the oil and gas industry. And it turns out that it's over a 10-year period from about 2010 to about 2020, private equity firms put about $1.1 trillion of investment into the energy sector, 80% of which was fossil fuels. That is more than the market share of Exxon, Chevron, and Shell combined, right? So, and what these companies are basically doing is they're buying the dirtiest oil and gas assets that not even the fossil fuel companies want to touch. So Hillcorp, which is a company owned by the Carlyle Group, became the largest emitter of methane in 2020. So like, well, why is this happening? Why all of these public companies, they disclose scope 1 emissions. So they're under all this pressure from their shareholders, all this pressure from society to, you know, they're not doing the best job of it, but to get rid of some of their dirtiest assets. Private equity firms, because there's no oversight, because they have no obligation to disclose anything accurately, they're the ones saying, well, instead of retiring these assets, sell them to us for cheap, and we'll just continue to pump them out. And so you see this in oil and gas. There are studies showing that for-profit colleges are being bought up by private equity with more student debt and higher tuition costs. You see this in real estate. You see this with mass layoffs in retail. It's happening all across the economy.
Yeah, I want to get to the real estate piece as well, because I still have this ringing in my mind. We had Ryan Grimm of The Intercept on of maybe 2 years at this point about private equity and their role in the commercial real estate industry, which is very scary for the future of the economy. But I'll put that to the aside for a second. Like, this is a bit of a facile point, but I've been watching The Sopranos, right? And there's a storyline where a guy has a gambling addiction, takes on a bunch of debt, and the mob
hardware store, or
sporting goods store, right? And the mafia buys says, okay, because of your debt, we are going to take over your sporting goods store, your fishing store, gut it for parts, make ourselves rich, and then we'll leave you bankrupt. We'll leave you without your store anymore, and you can move on with your life, right? That's functionally the exact same role that private equity plays in our economy. Glorified mobsters. And like in my ideal economy, this kind of crap would be outlawed because it's criminal and gutting, if I were to restructure the economy in this way, just to hammer this point home of how little value this actually adds to our society. In fact, it creates this negative outcome, all to essentially get these partners at private equity firms to get big bonuses, big salaries, which you touch on in your piece, if you don't mind expanding on that part.
Yeah, I think you're there's so much to respond to there, but I think you're right. And I will also say, I actually don't think it's just that they're contributing so little value and that they're creating harm. One of the things that was actually most scary for me writing this piece was when I started to read more about the financial side of things, right? So a quick little bit of history. In the wake of the great financial crisis, right, Congress comes in and passes all of these new regulations that limit the ability of traditional banks to make these kind of highly leveraged, high-risk loans, right? The kind of loans you make to private equity funds. But the appetite for those loans doesn't go away. And so what you see over the subsequent decade is really a migration of that high-risk lending from highly regulated banks to completely unregulated non-bank lenders, right, quote unquote. And one of these areas is the so-called private credit industry. And so this was worth about $300 billion in 2010. It's worth about $1.5 trillion today. And what it is these private funds, many of which are run by the same companies who own private equity funds, so like your KKRs, your Carlyles. And they make these extremely risky loans to private equity firms, among other sort of places. And when you talk to banking experts about this, the striking thing is the way this industry has all the core ingredients of a financial crisis waiting to happen, right? So I usually think about 3 ingredients to a financial crisis, right? 1 is lots of leverage, lots of debt, so check. 2 is conflicts of interest. Again, a lot of these creditors are the same institutions that are then taking these loans to do leverage buyouts, which means it's very possible a lot of these loans aren't going through the same level of scrutiny that you'd expect. And then the third ingredient is the one we've been talking about, opacity, right? Traditional banks have to reveal all kinds of information about the size of their loans, the performance of those loans, whether they can pass a stress test. Private credit lenders don't have to reveal any of that. And so you put all of this together, and it's not that these companies are just causing systematic harm. They're not just mobsters. they're also possibly creating the perfect financial tinderbox. And so then you take into account, the fact that interest rates are rising, and it feels like a recipe for disaster.
I have some other questions, but on this point, how is that? Would that be as systemic though? I mean, look, I mean, as the financial crisis. I mean, the financial crisis was problematic because it's systemic, because these were all public entities, and because they were able to sort of do second and third level leveraging of these securities. And so everything got intertwined within sort of like the sort of more vanilla versions of commercial banking. Is this sequestered because it's all just basically rich people self-dealing with each other? I mean, it would without a doubt end up like in, job losses, and perhaps like leaving some towns without a dentist, or because they have, driven out the other. But in terms of like a systemic financial crisis, how would it be a systemic financial crisis if they went, or would it be just like, oh, some very big players lost a lot of money? Now, of course, they have the power maybe to get Congress to bail them out, but it's not necessarily represent it doesn't, I'm not clear on what the systemic threat to the rest of us would be.
I'm so glad you went there, Sam, because that's where I was going to go next. Because when you talk to people in this industry, they make the same point, right? They make this point, look, the problem with 2008, and I'm not saying this is anywhere near 2008, was that banks have ordinary depositors, it's ordinary people. And so if you get some kind of crisis, that is going to tether out, that's going to extrapolate out to ripple out to the real economy. And private equity funds, right, they get their money from pension funds, they get their money from institutional investors. So that doesn't pose as much of a systemic risk. And that it's very possible that that's true. But then you get on the phone with some of these experts who are studying the industry closely, and they say, well, actually, we don't know. That's the whole problem. There are a lot of ways in which traditional banking sector which we don't fully even understand, but has loans that are also intertwined into this space, that are making loans to these private credit firms. We don't know anything about the size of these loans, who they're going to, how much leverage is involved. And so you can sort of think like, okay, well, probably we're just fine. And it's very possible that that's true. But the problem is the opacity. We actually don't know enough to know whether we're safe or whether we're in some kind of danger. With that said, would this be anywhere near sort of a 2008 kind of scenario? No. Could it be something that could cause a lot of trouble? Possibly. We just don't know. And even the people at the heart of this don't know.
If the opacity question and the idea of like imposing some type of transparency, and I don't know what that scheme would necessarily look like, and you would hear a lot of people saying, well, this is the whole point of it being private, is that we're not public, so we don't have this responsibility. If that is a solution to the problem of what could be the exposure to a financial crisis that we have, if we were to look at these entities from a perspective of worker protection, environmental protection, consumer or just citizen of the country protection, it seems to me that there's a whole host of transparency is sort of like a second order issue, right? But we could also deploy a whole set of other regulations, it seems to me, or laws that would curb the ability of private equity to take these type of positions that cause us to worry about we don't know what's happening there.
I think you're exactly right. The only thing I would say is I would flip the two. I think transparency is the foundation for everything else, right? No matter what action you want to take, whether it's you want to put in more worker protections, whether it's you want to put in mandatory requirements for emissions, whether it's you want to change whether bankruptcy schemes and bankruptcy law, if you don't know what the companies are doing, if you don't know who's owning them, you cannot know what kind of abuses are happening. This is actually something that's coming up right now. The FTC currently has a lawsuit against a private equity fund that has been rolling up. So what private equity roll up is when they basically buy up a bunch of smaller companies, usually family-owned companies, and then use that sort of new monopoly power to raise prices. There's an FTC case right now being done in the anesthesiology industry in Texas, where there's this private equity fund that's rolling up all of these small and local anesthesiology practices and has basically doubled prices. And so they're basically, this is classic monopoly power. But the FTC is basically, one of the things they've said is one of the biggest barriers to them having, the reason they haven't brought many cases against private equity funds is they don't even know when these roll-ups are happening because these funds don't have to disclose their ownership. Right. They don't have to disclose their ownership. So any action you want to take, whether it's anti-monopoly, whether it's regulations around worker protections, you sort of need a basic foundation of transparency. It's not the answer, but it's the sort of prerequisite.
The beginning of the solution. And what would be, how would you trigger these transparency things? Because I mean, as soon as like I'm thinking like, oh, okay, we'll just do you hit a certain number in terms of ownership entity. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to buy the number, let's say is $300 million. I'm going to go buy $299 million worth of anesthesiologist outfits. And then I'm going to start another private equity firm. And instead of calling it Sam's private equity, I'm going to call it Emma's private equity. And they're going to go and buy up another $299 billion of anesthesiology firms. And when we see each other at work, we just go like, we're going to raise the prices, right? Right. Yeah. And that's it. And there's no way to know that there's price fixing because we don't have that opacity. Like, how do we do this? Like, what is the framework that you do? You have to make that number low.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the first very core problem is just how backwards we do this compared to other countries. In almost no other advanced democracy is a company's need to disclose tied to whether they're publicly traded. Like, why should being on a stock market be the thing that then makes you accountable to the public? It's all based on size. Like you said, it's based on scale. It's based on how big you are, how much money you have. That in most other countries is there's a minimum that you hit and then you have to disclose. I think that there are always ways people are going to be able to get around these loopholes. I think the first problem you're going to have to address is there's too many ways to get around being a publicly traded company. There are far less ways to get around, and it's far more difficult, and we have more laws around sort of scale requirements. And so if the requirement was just scale, like technically you can make two different companies collude, but that's a lot harder, and we have a lot better mechanisms to stop that from happening than just like a company never even coming to be publicly traded in the first place. And so I think you're really right to point that out. But I think as a basic minimum, it's just we should shift the disclosure regime from being a publicly traded company where there are all these loopholes around to just, if you are big enough to affect millions of people, thousands of people, even hundreds of people, then the public and society, you are big enough to affect society, and society should get to know what you're up to. Has there been outside of, I mean, you at the start of our conversation, you spoke about how much private equity has grown since I think like the year 2000 or so, but has there been an explosive growth in just like private concentration of wealth with private companies, non-publicly traded companies outside of private equity as well? Yes, that is definitely happening. So there sort of, you could think of sort of all private companies as being private equity, which I usually, when I refer to private equity, I mostly refer to leverage buyouts. So the kind of private equity like buyout model I was describing earlier, which is about 2/3 of all private companies. But then there's also venture capital. There's also sort of just private funds. So there's other companies in that mix. The numbers I cited are for private equity only, but there has been this huge rise of private companies generally, because even if you're not bought by a private firm, if you realize, well, I don't have to disclose anything, I don't have to go through all these onerous regulations, then maybe even if I'm not owned by a private company, or I'm not owned by a private equity firm, even if I'm just owned by Mark Zuckerberg, I still don't want to do this because it would just require it. Yes, I mean that was why Musk took Twitter private, was because of this very dynamic that you describe, or at least one of his stated psychotic reasons. And folks in the industry will say, well, that's the whole point, right? Like the whole point is that there are all these onerous requirements for public companies. And by allowing companies to be private, you allow them to be more dynamic, they make more money for their investors. And at the end of the day, that's better for our economy. And then you actually look at the best studies on how much private equity funds actually return to their shareholders. So they say, we are less regulated, but that's because we're more dynamic, we make more money. And every good study on this has basically shown that until about 2000, private equity funds did slightly outperform the stock market. But basically since the year 2000, once you take into account their high fees, you're better off buying an index fund of the S&P 500 than private equity. So the entire reason that they claim to want to be exempt from these public requirements, which is that it allows them to be more dynamic, to theoretically create more jobs and value for their investors, it's not true.
Well, they create more value for a limited number of the investors is really probably what's going on.
Not even them. I think a huge problem here is a lot of the investors themselves don't even have full disclosure. And the sort of what the private equity funds are able to reveal is fairly limited. Now, you might wonder, well, is the government doing anything about this? The SEC actually just came up with a new regulation called the Private Funds Rule, which now, for the first time, requires private equity funds to reveal to their own investors sort of more about their fees and about how their investors are doing. But the point sort of I would make is, it's not just that small pool of investors that deserves to know what these companies are doing.
Right.
It's the rest of us. And so there is some progress being made, but it's not nearly enough.
Is there any movement? I mean, I know the answer to this already, but is there any movement statutorily to, provide any more sort of transparency to what's going on, which of course, again, is the beginning, and this is why they would fight the transparency more than anything else, because once you get the transparency, then all of a sudden you're giving a game plan to anybody who says, hey, this is a problem, that's a problem, and then it's off to the races with different constituencies basically saying, we need to regulate this, we need to regulate that.
There is some movement, but right now it's mostly limited to basically industry by industry, right? So to the Biden administration's credit, HHS, Health and Human Services, recently proposed a rule that would require nursing homes to disclose additional ownership information and management information. That's great. But the problem is, right, one of the things that has actually come out recently is that already private equity funds are starting to pivot away from nursing homes and more into home health. So they realize that a lot of this, after the work of journalists and researchers and things like that, finally regulators are catching up. Now they're like, okay, now that regulators are catching up, we're going to have to make our money in other places. And so right now, this is happening on a very industry by industry basis where the harms have been most concentrated. But that doesn't tell us where the harms are going to happen next. And so what I would like to see is a more broad-based law, which would probably require some kind of congressional action, which we know is probably not going to happen right now, but there is some possibility that would require this sort of across the board instead of forcing individual agencies to try to follow whatever trail is being left by the harms that have already been committed.
Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic. The piece is The Secretive Industry Devouring the U.S. Economy. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time, Teddy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me and for the fantastic questions. It's great to be with you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will have fun and take your phone calls. Oh, let's just go over this court case because
sure,
important. Oh, and I would say also, before we go over this court case, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a member of this program, you can go to majority.fm, log in as a member, and get your discount code for our merch shop at shop.majorityreportradio.com. And you will see there. Now, you're not going to get it before Christmas because it's December 20th. And Christmas is some days. I always get confused if it's the 23rd or the 25th.
It's the 25th.
Okay. I didn't celebrate it as a kid. And
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to.
No, I mean, I know. But anyways,
yeah.
Regardless, whether it's 25th or the 23rd, and we're checking on that, you're not going to get this. But it is in the can you get up the screen? Let's check it out.
Deposit dog collars.
The dog collars, ladies and gentlemen. The Posit dog collars are now in the Majority Report shop. As everything else, they are American made, and I believe union as well. Certainly the printing is. And there they are. The two Majority Report dog collars. One is a red. $12. That's it. Three in black as well. Wait, we're only selling it for $12?
Those are great.
What are we doing? We're giving them away?
My mom's new
dog. There's no profit.
My mom's new dog needs to pause her barking, so I don't think this would be appropriate.
Folks, this is a great way to go out. I always think about dogs in the context of LA or New York. That's, and people go and take their dogs to like dog parks.
Yeah.
And this is a great way to, start a conversation piece.
Oh, yeah.
If your dog is not in any way sort of like charming or entertaining and people don't want to talk about your dog, but you want to talk to other dog owners, this is a great way to make your dog seem like they have more character.
And, like in my family, we get our dogs a little Christmas gift, okay, right? For them to open up. But you could just get them a bone and then a printout of the dog collar and say, hey, this is coming, right? Like, people do that. When the gifts are a little delayed in the mail, you print out an image of it and then you give it to the person or animal in this instance. So you can still get this for your dog for Christmas. It'll work out.
People are saying now it was supposed to say PAWSIT, PAWSIT.
Whatever.
Was it supposed to? I mean, isn't it the joke? Maybe it should have. Well, all right. I mean, it says PAWSIT. Whatever.
I mean, we have to have some brand consistency. When we get a little bit too down the pun rabbit hole.
Yeah, you'll still say PAWSIT. I don't know.
Whoopsie.
All right, Trump. This Colorado ruling, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled yesterday that Trump is disqualified. And there's a couple of these. One's there's still like an active case in Minnesota. There's a couple of states that have heard this case. Minnesota and New Hampshire, I should say, were dismissed on procedural grounds. And I don't know if there's any other cases at the moment, but if this case was found, if it was found that he was ineligible because of federal law in Colorado or the federal constitution, you're bound to see more others. So there's a lot of stakes here. It's not just about Colorado. So here is what the Colorado Supreme Court found. You have Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And let's pop this up. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. 4 justices voted that he was ineligible. 3 said that he was, that dissented and said he was eligible. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Which was, the context of that is that it was written after the Civil War to basically try to bar those who supported the Confederacy.
Exactly.
From running for higher office. They were obviously, insurrectionists in and of themselves or, coup attempters. So that's the context of this part of the amendment. Now,
the Supreme Court in Colorado was overturning a district court ruling, and the district court ruling found thusly. Right? There's 4 questions that need to be asked. Was it an insurrection when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021, trying to stop the certification of the 2020 election? Well, the district court found that, yes, there was an insurrection. It was an insurrection. And then the next question they have to ask, if it was an insurrection, did Trump engage in that insurrection through his messages to supporters and his speech that morning and his Twitter posts and whatever else he did? And this is, incidentally, the district court found this even before hearing about the lies that the people who
organized,
got the permit for the original rally, they knew that there was an attempt to go down to Congress, and that would have made it even more of a slam dunk. And so the answer to that was yes. Not only was there an insurrection, but Trump was instrumental in causing that insurrection. And then the next question is, do the courts have the authority to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment without congressional action? The district court found, yes, it does. But the last one was, does Section 3 apply to the presidency? And the district court found that it did not. And here is the language for Section 3. No person shall be a senator or a representative in Congress or elector of the president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such a disability. So forget about the Congress moving such a disability. That would basically mean, like, if let's say, for instance, somebody was running for Senate. Now, it would be very curious to see if someone wants to do this with Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz or something like that, Ron Johnson. But put that aside for a moment. If someone's going to the Senate, the 2/3 of each house could say, well, Ron Johnson was subject to all this, but we're going to allow him to come in. And so put that aside. The question is president there? Now, the argument of the district court was he's not named. Everybody else is named.
Right.
Senators are named.
Yeah.
Congress people are named. Electors are named. And people who hold any office, who have taken an oath or an officer as a member of the state legislature or executive to support the Constitution of the United States. Now, the oath for the presidency is different than it is for every other office.
Yeah.
So the real question is does or hold any office refer to the president of this country? Now, on one hand, it's like, well, any office, he has an office. I mean, he's the president.
It's the ultimate office, and it's odd that the section doesn't include it. Like, it seems like an oversight by the people.
Seems like it would be a weird oversight to say, like, we're doing this, but we're not going to mention president. And now maybe at the time they're like, well, Jefferson Davis, he held other offices, and so we don't need to do that. But they did not include the president. And, at least in the context of contract law, when you do enumerate some things, this many things, and you're this, but you leave out something that would obviously be enumerated if you meant to enumerate it. Now, they could have also said, this does not apply to the president. But the weird thing is this. I don't know if they could have imagined after that the president, that maybe they couldn't say that, well, I don't know. It's a weird, I mean, it doesn't say president, so maybe you can as a president. I don't know. The Supreme Court's going to overturn it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And even if they don't, the stay and the process of appeal, unless they do a shadow docket right off the bat or whatever, it's going to take, he'll be on the ballot. The
district court found that because the presidential oath is worded differently from the oaths of the other enumerated offices, it was concluded that the broad phrase "officers of the United States" was not intended to include the presidency, and the Colorado Supreme Court disagreed. So there it is.
This is a great point in the IMs from Kowalski. I feel that, like, the president would be covered under the military clause. The president is the highest ranking military position, so wouldn't that cover the president? Because in that sense, I mean, he is the commander in chief.
I mean, maybe that will come up in the context of this argument. I don't know that it was referenced in the Colorado decision. To be fair, I haven't read that decision yet. So, but there it is. We will know more starting January 4th.
Yeah. Probably not going to really amount.
Political Pyrone writes, I'm hearing that the framers did include, well, it wouldn't have been the framers. This is the 14th Amendment. But that the people who wrote it, or framers maybe of the amendment, did include the president in early drafts, then removed. If that's true, can they consider that? I mean, yeah, the intent of Congress would, if they did include in earlier drafts and they took it out, it would show an intent to not include the president.
And then you know who's going to run with that? Every conservative on the court.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case,
then they would say, textually, the president's not included, as well as you see historical records, they made an effort not to include the president. So if that's the case, that just strengthens Trump's case, unfortunately.
We'll see. But MSND, we'll know more in January. MSDN Cedar says, going to need a leather posit collar for me after getting a normal one for my dog. Oh, for me. Oh, I see. Okay. Folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the show. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you join the Majority Report, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you get the fun half, and you get that discount on the merch shop, which is good until December 26th. The discount is good until December 26th. So you can get a late Christmas present and tell your person that you've given it to it's on its way. Don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, featuring the Majority Report blend, which you can pick up. Use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off that delicious and cooperative coffee. Emma, ESPN.
Yes. On ESPN, we danced on the grave of Brandon Staley. We danced on the misery of the Dallas Cowboys, the Jaguars falling apart. What the hell is wrong with them? The Cinderella stories of the Rams and the Bucks as well. And just how good are those damn 49ers? I can't see them losing another game this year. And yes, I'm including the Super Bowl in that. YouTube.com/ESPN show. And Bradley, on behalf of Matt Leck.
Yeah, so I believe Matt, because he was on his way home, David took the reins for Left Reckoning last night. He spoke with Nicole Klein-Heisterkamp-Gonzalez, a PhD student in geography at Syracuse University, to discuss her research on the labor-environment nexus in Germany. So if you want to check that out, youtube.com/Left Reckoning, and you can access the postgame at patreon.com/Left Reckoning as well.
We'll be right back with the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta
to get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Sam Seder, soon to be Emma Vigeland, the Majority Report. Ramona asks, are we finally going to watch the War on Christmas clip? I've got visions of sugar plums dancing in my head, and I'm getting antsy. Well, you've asked for it, and we never, ever, ever deny a request like this. Ladies and gentlemen, and I'm trying to think of when this was. I think this was in 2005. And, I was working at Air America,